First, I wanted to talk about Donald Trump's post about the war, where once again he is requesting with vigor that we go back to, acknowledging the great work he's done to end the war here, and that we need to be more thankful. Over the past week, my team has made tremendous progress with respect to ending the war between Russia and Ukraine, a war that would never have started if I were president. Last month, 25,000 soldiers died. The original 28-point peace plan, which was drafted by the United States, has been fine-tuned with additional input from both sides. By the way, that does acknowledge that the first peace plan had no input from the other side. Putting that forward there. And the reason why it started there, again, I need to emphasize, is because this is a J.D. Vance initiative, and J.D. Vance has always emphasized the idea that, look, Russia's winning, they're the ones winning, they get all their demands met, Ukraine doesn't get their demands met. That's essentially the way he put it. So he framed it in a way that where Ukraine was the conceder, they were the one making concessions, and Russia was the victor, the ones getting concessions, the one being rewarded. Mind you, that this is a way where you could encourage other invasions. This is not being made and designed with the way to actually stop the war, which then removes the entire meaning of us even being in the process, the whole point. If we're just there to give Russia a crown and go da-da-da-da, then we're not doing anything except patting them on the back while rewarding aggression. At that point, just remove ourselves from the entire negotiation process to begin with. But Donald Trump made so much of an image of himself as peacemaker here. I guess that's not really possible. Either way, I think Vance's plan was terribly misguided. And so after Vance's initiative, didn't really landed with a thud across the Atlantic, they then had additional input from the other side, and now it's 19 points. And I have to say, going from 28 points to 19 points isn't a little bit of fine tuning. That's almost an entirely different plan. Just saying. In the hopes of finalizing this peace plan, I have directed my special envoy, Steve Witkoff, to meet with President Putin in Moscow. We're going to talk about this in a second, about why it's interesting it's Steve Witkoff. And at the same time, Secretary of the Army, Dan Driscoll, that's J.D. Vance's old college buddy, will be meeting with the Ukrainians. I will be briefed on all progress made, along with Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, and White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles. I look forward to hopefully meeting with President Zelensky and President Putin soon, but only when the deal to end the war is final or in its final stages. Thank you for your attention to this very important matter, and let's all hope that peace can be accomplished as soon as possible. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. Okay, so I have to say, they haven't made much progress. The only progress that I would say has been made, and I will acknowledge this, is that we've moved the limit from like what the Russians would have said at the start of the war to 125,000 to now 800,000, when the Russians are demanding less than 800,000. Quite a lot less earlier, and still less just months before. Right? So that is showing that while still principally any limitation on the aggressed upon state in military capacity, which is not coincided with the limitation on the aggressor state, is in principle wrong, in practicality, this is really moving the amount of capacity the Ukrainians could have to defend themselves. So that right there is probably the most significant actual change. And the fact that the Trump government is now acknowledging that there'll probably have to be some sort of guarantee security-wise for the Ukrainians. There is still some ridiculous sections about how the United States has to profit off of the deal, just like nickel and diming the United States every turn and corner of this agreement. There are still sections that have been unresolved. And I think that those unresolved sections of the border in the Donetsk region are probably the most glaring. And I think of what exactly defines the security guarantees for Ukraine, even if there is now more of an acknowledgement that there has to be one, which is what Zelensky said at the Oval Office meeting that got him so much trouble all those days ago. At least there's an acknowledgement that there has to be one. T-Rex, thank you so much for the primer. I appreciate that. Thank you for the Bezos bucks. Now, all of this leads to the most important point. Steve Witkoff. This process breaks down if your team is uncoordinated. This process breaks down
Burns
if your
is
team
an immoral,
is
morally
not working
corrupt, bankrupt man.
towards the same goal, or if your team is interested in completely separate objectives. If one person is perfectly fine with one thing, so they'll angle for it in every capacity, while another person will angle for another way, while another person will angle for another way, while the person at the head of it has no clear sense of direction, you are a guideless and a rudderless ship. And the way that the Trump administration has engaged in negotiations up to this point has been like a rudderless ship with no sense of direction, no way to turn left, no way to turn right, no way to go up, no way to go down. Just goes in circles, where we're going from sanctions to major concessions, back to no action, back to talking about Ukraine could win, then talking about how Ukraine could never win. Robin Webb, thank you for the tier 1 sub, 21 months. And I want to talk about one of the most egregious actors of this, and that is Steve Witkoff. And I'm talking about Steve Witkoff because we now have transcripts from Steve Witkoff in his conversations with Russian diplomats on how to best convince the president of the United States of their agreements. Of this agreement we're talking about before, which was talking about the Ukrainians being limited to 600,000, was talking about the Ukrainians giving up defensible positions in Donbass and having to evacuate large parts of the Donbass as they would give it up to Russian occupation after having won the defense of Kramatorsk. And so this transcript is a huge scandal, but the way it's being covered by the Trump administration is as, don't worry about it. This is just, normal diplomacy. Let's read this, and you come to this journey with me. Come along with me, and you tell me if you think this is normal diplomacy. In an October 14th phone call that lasted a little over 5 minutes, Witkoff advised Yuri Yushukov, Putin's top foreign policy aide, on how the Russian leader should broach the issue with Trump. His guidance included suggestions on setting up a Trump-Putin call before Zelensky's White House visit later that week and using the Gaza agreement as a way in. Listen to this. Yuri, here's what I would do. My recommendation. Yes, please. I would make the call and just reiterate that you congratulate the president on this achievement and that you supported it. You supported it, that you respect that he is a man of peace, and you're just really glad to see it happen. So I would say that I think from that, it's going to be a really good call. Because let me tell you what I told the president. I told the president that the Russian Federation has always wanted a peace deal. Always wanted. Hear that? Always wanted a peace. They were never interested in war when they said that, it's going to be a quick special operation, just dethrone the government, install their own government, take some land, redefine Ukraine as a proxy for Russia, redefine Ukraine's borders at will, smother its culture. Always wanted a peace deal. Always. Even though Vladimir Putin released articles once before the invasion about how Ukraine could only exist as an extension of Russia or part of Russia. And he did a whole hour-long speech talking about all the reasons he invaded outside of, our bad relationship with the West. That's my belief. I told the president I believe that. And I believe that question is, the issue is that we have two nations that are having a hard time coming to a compromise. And when we do, we're going to have a peace deal. I'm even thinking that maybe we set out like a 20-point peace proposal, like we did in Gaza. We put a 20-point Trump plan together that was 20 points for peace, and I'm thinking we do the same thing with you. My point is, okay, my friend, I think that very point our leaders could discuss. Hey, Steve, I agree with you that he will congratulate. He will say Mr. Trump is a real peace man and
Burns is
so and
an
so.
immoral, morally corrupt, bankrupt man.
He will say that Trump is a real peace man. A real peace man and so and so. Thank you for the tenor, Ohms. My goodness. White House's compliment. He is a real peace man and so, of course, and so. That he will say. But here's what I would think it would be amazing. Okay, what if, hear me out. I will discuss this with my boss and I will come back to you, okay? Yes, because listen to what I'm saying. I just want you to say, maybe just to say this to President Putin. Because, I have the deepest respect for President Putin. Yes. Maybe he says to President Trump, Steve and Yuri discussed a very similar 20-point plan that could be something that we think might move the needle a little bit. And we're going to open to these sorts of things to explore what it's going to take to get a peace deal done. Now, me to you, I know what it's going to take to get a peace deal done. Donetsk and maybe a land swap somewhere. But I'm just saying, instead of talking like that, let's talk more hopefully. Because I think we're going to get a deal here. And I think, Yuri, the president will give me a lot of space and discretion to get the deal. I see. So if we can create that opportunity, that after that, I talk to Yuri and we have a conversation, I think that could lead to big stuff. Okay, that sounds good. And here's one more thing. Zelensky is coming to the White House on Friday. I know that. I will go to that meeting because they want me there. But I think, if possible, we will have the call with your boss before the Friday meeting. Before, yeah, correct. Okay, I got your advice. So I discussed that with my boss and I come back to you, okay? Okay, Yuri. I'll speak to you soon. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye. So that is Steve Witkoff telling a Russian diplomat that he knows what it's going to take to get this done. It's going to mean the Donetsk region. It's going to mean that the cities of Kramatorsk and Slovyansk, which do not want to be part of the Russian Federation, the populations largely do not want to be part of the Russian Federation, where there's tons of people from Donetsk that have been displaced into this small area. This is where a lot of the refugees and displaced people from the rest of Donetsk have already rebuilt their lives, and they don't want to have to do it a second, or in some instances, a third time. And he is saying, on his own initiative, on his own words, with zero indication from any other figure within the White House, like Donald Trump, that is a real decision maker, that this is now the American position. He's just indicating that that's what it's going to take to get this done. That he knows it, and he's saying this privately, outside of the ear of the president. Also, here's advice to get on Donald Trump's good side. Call him and really push his buttons and tell him how good he is and how great he is, and he's Mr. Peaceman. And that's the way they talk. Oh yeah, Mr. Peaceman. Because unsurprisingly, Mr. Peaceman is not a title that the Russians respect very highly. This is embarrassing. This is not only embarrassing for the United States, it's embarrassing also that this got out in the first place, but it's embarrassing that he is coaching them on how to get on the president's good side and saying, oh, compliment him here, compliment him there. There is no functional purpose as a diplomat, as an envoy, as a negotiator for him to give them advice on how to get on Trump's good side talking like this, unless his role is not just to convince the Russians or not just to convince the Ukrainians, but is also to convince Donald Trump himself that Steve Witkoff wants to have an outsized influence on how these talks go. He is outperforming and overperforming his role, not in like he's doing a good job, as in he's doing what he's supposed to do, but as in he is becoming too big for his station, where he is making decisions that is not his place to make. He is getting ideas about how he can be the one to guide this around when his job is supposed to meet position A to position B, to get this person and this person in the same room, to get them to agree to a framework, not for him to guide the mood or how Donald Trump receives an idea because he's in a good mood or a bad mood. By doing that, he's no longer performing as a diplomat of the state, trying to convince the Russians or trying to convince the Ukrainians. He's now also trying to convince his own government. And not only on that, but in the same call where we see that he's trying to give them advice on how to convince his own government, we also learn that he is saying, outside of the eyes of the public, that, hey, we know here in this call in this room that eventually we're going to have to give up the Donetsk region, but we have to be more optimistic than that. Remember earlier on when these negotiations started, Trump even said he would try to get some of Ukraine's land back, as in, hey, maybe we can get back the rest of Zaporizhia and Kherson. Maybe, as if there was this idea that, the Russians would give them Mariupol, which would be great if you actually put the pieces on the board and change the situation on the ground so that they would actually consider the position, that they would have reasons to consider the position. But they haven't done that. And so since they have not taken the actions to make that a possibility, that early talk turned out to be nothing. And now they're talking about giving up territory that isn't even controlled by the Russian Federation. And now we have this diplomat who is no more qualified to hold the position outside of the fact that he is personal friends with the president of the United States from their days in real estate. He is now deciding the fate of a city of 500,000 people in Kramatorsk and Slovyansk. The fates of all these people who have been displaced into northern Donetsk. And he is deciding it without the president's say-so. No, this is not how diplomacy regularly goes. And to say that it is regular diplomacy, I mean, it's not surprising that it's not regular diplomacy. I'm not surprised that it's not regular diplomacy because he's not a diplomat. He doesn't have diplomatic training. He is a real estate broker. And now a real estate broker is trying to treat the lives and destinies of all these people like it's vacant property. But it's not vacant. People live there. And we've got more, by the way. Listen to this. This is from Yushankov and Dmitriev. Hello, Yuri Viktorovich. Yes, Kirill Alexeyevich. Well, I've sent everything there. We'll talk tomorrow. Well, great. Yes. I flew to Saudi Arabia. But it seems to me it's very important because it's a really good way forward. Well, we need the maximum, don't you think? What do you think? Otherwise, what's the point of passing anything on? No, look, I think we'll just make this paper from our position, and I'll informally pass it along, making it clear that it's all informal, and let them do like their own. But I don't think they'll take exactly our version. But at least let it'll be as close as it to possible. Well, that's exactly the point. They might not take and say that it was agreed with us. That's what I'm afraid of. No. I'll say it exactly as you say it, word for word. They might twist it later, that's all. There is that risk. There is. Well, all right, never mind. We'll see. Yeah, it seems to me you can talk later with Steve about this paper. We will do everything neatly. Thank you so much, Yuri Viktorovich. Thank you so much. Goodbye. Look, these negotiations, until they solve these two major issues of territory, where the line is actually going to be drawn, and a real security guarantee that assures that the Russians are not going to attack again, so we don't just have Minsk 3.0, and then we're no closer to the end of this cycle of invasions. But in the meantime, before we get anywhere close to that peace deal, because I still believe that the war will probably continue into 2026, considering how I see the speed of negotiations going and seeing the areas that they still have yet to resolve. The main questions I have now are, A, who's leaking this? Who are leaking these communiques? I'm super, super interested on how Bloomberg News got these communications, who gave it to them, and like why they don't like Steve Witkoff, because that's what I think this is meant to do. I think this is meant to make Steve Witkoff look like an utter buffoon. That's what I think. Secondly, I want to know how close these negotiations get to a workable settlement, because I don't think the territorial issue is going to be settled. And I think the Russians wanting to keep the possibility of reinvasion on the table are ultimately not going to agree in the immediate term to any long-term security arrangement that really deters another invasion, i.e., a security guarantee that is actionable, a security guarantee that is real. And so I don't think that the Russians are going to agree to that right now until they're put in a position where they don't really feel like they have much of a choice. So I don't think that we're much closer to an agreement, but I think that we are much closer to what might be used as a framework for an agreement, given 6 months in a year's time, or if things change on the board, or if there is a major factor brought out that changes the power balance or dynamics so that one side takes the initiative. Lastly, I want to see how the war settles going into the winter when it comes to Ukrainian and Russian communications, because we have Budanov meeting with Russian intelligence officials in Abu Dhabi. We got this CIA trained brainchild from one of the CIA trained units who is now heading Ukraine's military intelligence GUR. Um, he communicating with the Russians leads to more body transfers, could possibly lead to more body identification and POW transfers. I hope one day it could lead to areas where neither of them are operating, or gray zones, them being allowed to send in body identification teams, body retrieval teams. That'd be nice, but I don't know if we're any closer to that. But I think that is probably going to be the biggest result of these talks and negotiations, is going to be another wave of body transfers, body identification, and POW transfers, just like it was for every other wave of Trump negotiation. I think that's probably the inevitability. Also, did you guys see that JD Vance is on social media like defending the original peace plan? He was like defending it as, noble and great and fantastic, and we must defend it like tooth and nail. Listen to this. After 4 years of house prices doubling and in some areas tripling, many young people feel priced out of the American dream of home ownership. A welfare fraud scandal in Minnesota reveals that large numbers of new arrivals aren't assimilating and are funneling our tax dollars to literal terrorist groups. An innocent woman was set on fire in Chicago as the mayor resists federal law enforcement resources to bring peace to one of our great cities. The Obamacare insurance system is buckling under its own weight, and the country is $38 trillion in debt. Administration working hard to address all of these problems. But you know what really fires up the Beltway GOP? Not any of the above. Instead, the political class is really angry that the Trump administration may finally bring a 4-year conflict in Eastern Europe to a close. I'm not even talking about the substance of their view. Much of what these problems have said, people have said about Ukraine war have been proven wrong. But whatever, we can agree to disagree. But the level of passion over this one issue when your own country has serious problems is bonkers. It disgusts me. Show some passion for your own country. Look, JD Vance doesn't give a fuck. All the Ukrainian people could explode tomorrow, and he would literally not blink. Literally not blink. He said at the start of the war, I do not care. That was his official position at the start of the war when the invasion happened. That position was so egregious that his campaign staff released a statement immediately after he said it when he was running for the Senate in Ohio. I remember that because I was following Tim Ryan's campaign against him. And when they released that statement in Ohio, they were doing it because there is a significant number of Ohioans that have Ukrainian heritage. And in a Senate election where he had been unelected before, and he was making a bit of a flip in the type of politics he was putting forward, they wanted to try to play it safe. And so they quieted that down, corrected, like, oh no, of course Mr. Vance cares about Ukraine. Then after the election, he just went back to not giving a fuck. He just went back to not caring. And so this idea of like, oh my gosh, why do you guys get worked up? He just can't sympathize with it at all. He doesn't understand this passion to make sure that we uphold our commitments. He doesn't understand that there is a certain standard in Europe that we believe that is valuable for the United States to uphold. Like peace in Europe is good for the United States, but peace isn't as simple as signing a piece of paper. If that was the case, then Minsk 1 or Minsk 2 should have been enough, but it wasn't. You need to build the foundations for peace. You need to make sure that it's structurally sound. You need to make sure that it can deal with pressure and so that it can deter. But this administration, and certainly JD Vance, can't live by that principle of peace through strength, which they constantly talk so much about when it comes to this. But they certainly can do it when it comes to nation states that barely have an air force, like Venezuela, or any country that we can basically take out the club and just go to town on because our power disparity is so overwhelming. When it comes to dealing with a bigger threat, when it comes to not, I don't want to say shooting fish in a barrel, because that would not be a good summation of any attempt to actually remove Maduro. But when it comes to dealing with any force that there is not a gigantic power disparity with, he doesn't know how to operate. He doesn't know, he would not know what to do faced with a Berlin-style crisis with Stalin. He would buckle. And that's why this man can't be president. Anyway, Representative Don Bacon responded to this, Republican within the Republican Party. Many of us are Reagan fans. We hate appeasing Putin's Russia and throwing Ukraine, who wants freedom and independence, under Putin's bus. The Thursday 28-point surrender plan was disgusting. The only reason I bring this up, he goes on to reference Neville Chamberlain, is the report is this being one of the more Reaganite interventionist style Republicans. He was so disgusted by the plan that he actually told colleagues that he almost literally fainted when he saw what the 28-point plan put forward by the administration was. Once it was clarified that it was the administration's plan, and Marco Rubio had to go back on the idea that it was actually just a Russian proposal, which we then found out later it basically was a Russian proposal that the administration just boxed and shipped. Fascinating. Fascinating indeed.